Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the country or even in the world. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Ian Barker and I'm the developer advocate. We're going to give people a few moments to join. We're still seeing the numbers tick up there whilst people are joining the webinar. We're doing pretty well. It looks like everybody got the links, which is always a good start. Today's webinar is about security and really the kind of things that you can accidentally overlook, or maybe a few tips in terms of dealing with the security of both the products that you're using, software that you're using, and even your own security of your customers and things like that. And we'll go into that in depth. We're expecting the webinar to take around about an hour, give or take. It just depends on number of questions and things like that. There is a questions panel, and if you put your questions in there, you won't see them straight away, but when we get around to answering them, you'll see them appear as well. There are people behind the scenes from UltraEdit, and I think we're probably nearly there in terms of people joining. You see, if I start too soon, everybody panics. So there you go. Okay then, all right, we'll start the presentation. Okay, as I said earlier on, my name is Ian Barker and I'm the developer advocate. This is an UltraEdit masterclass, and really we're talking about the security of your products, your customers, yourself in general. It's a topic that's becoming more and more relevant. Even myself, just recently, my father-in-law actually just had someone try and take all his money by using a combination of social engineering and shall we say dodgy websites. Is that too British a phrase? I'm not sure. And really trying to take advantage of people's lack of understanding of the more complicated aspects of online life that have begun to sort of become common. More and more, you've got complicated web pages that do lots of exciting things and very dynamic. It's made our world much smaller. Social media has helped us to learn that things that we do like about people and the things we don't necessarily like about people. But with that is an incentive for criminals and the underbelly of society, shall we say, to come along and take advantage of that. And if you're in business, if you're using something like UltraEdit in your daily business, you would think, well, it's an editor, it's going to be fine, it's just editing text files. Well, stick with us through this webinar and we'll talk about how that isn't necessarily the case and the kind of things that UltraEdit as a company and as a product do to try and prevent those criminals, bad actors, and just simple plain mistakes from affecting you. So if you're in business or you have customers, then sales are really only the beginning. You followed all the best advice and things are really, finally just right. You know how it is. You've got over that hump, that initial pain of getting into business, or maybe, you've just come through a recession, or perhaps in this post-COVID era, you're starting to recover and it's looking good. Things are going well. Your users love your product and services. It's a success and everything is going great. It's a great story. It's a happy place. But then one day the phone calls begin. One by one, your customers begin to send in the same story. Your success, your hard work has been exploited by someone, and the customer's data has been stolen or compromised. Or worse, their whole network is now compromised. And who are they pointing the finger at? They're blaming you. Well, that's not a happy place to be, but unfortunately, it is more and more common. And you might say, well, this wouldn't happen to me. That's not how things work. Well, unfortunately, that is not true. According to the 2021 Thales Data Threat Report, almost half, or 45% of US companies suffered a data breach in the previous year. And that's the most recent figures that I've got available. You can expect that actually this is probably higher now, that number, because not everybody wants to report those breaches, even though in most countries now, certainly in Europe and the US, there are lots of rules about things like these cryptolocker viruses and hacks and compromises, data compromises, requiring you to report them. But obviously, people still choose to decide for themselves that that's not necessary for them to follow that advice. And also, despite this as well, there's an increase in the scale, the frequency, and the sophistication of the attacks, according to Thales. So things are actually getting worse. I know that sounds like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, but unfortunately, there are figures that back it up. What does it cost you potentially if you have a breach? Well, in Europe, the supervisory authorities, which is the EU, councils and things like that, they've issued so far total fines of 1.1 billion. That's a billion, not a million, billion euro fines, or 1.2 billion US dollars, or about 0.9 billion UK pounds. And that's just since January 28th of 2021. Remember, that was a time when most companies were doing things like 3-day weeks or having furloughs and things like that. So that was at a time when business was already suppressed in terms of what was going on in, with trade and you know, people attending offices and all those kind of things. So 1.1 billion during that period. The average penalty in 2019, and that again is the latest figures we've got, was 630,000 euros. And by 2025, by 2020, the average GDPR fine, which is the data protection laws for Europe, they'd risen to more than $1 million. Now, it used to be back in the day that if you breach the data handling and protection rules that were introduced by the EU, the fine was modest, shall we say. You could be looking at 10,000, which is painful for most people, especially if you're a small business. But that has risen now to nearly €1 million. You can get some insurance for that, but even so, it's a worrying time when you suddenly realize that you know, you're on the hook for being responsible. And these 2020, 2021 figures, they've increased since then. And I know you're going to say, well, this is just, you know, spreading fear. Well, unfortunately, that is a legitimate thing to worry about. It's not some kind of fuzzy scaremongering. You know, I want you to be worried because there's a genuine problem. It's like being worried about having a car crash and wearing a seatbelt, for example. It's not being a scaredy cat to wear a seatbelt. It's very sensible because these things happen. May not happen to you in all of your driving career, but sooner or later it might do. And the same happens here. The more of these breaches that go on, the more incentive there is for these criminals to actually do this kind of thing. Breach data, resell data, con people out of their bank details, all those kind of things. The more that the agencies like the EU, the UK and the US data protection organizations, the more they seem to respond by increasing the fines. And so just to make sure that you've got some of this information at your fingertips so you can check up on me and make sure I'm not just scaremongering and making it up as I go along, here's some of the statistics. So the DLA Piper GDPR fines, if you just Google that, you'll find the latest numbers. This slide's a little bit out of date, by about 6 months, I think. Fresh Fraud's Bruckhaus Deringer, which is a great name. They're talking about the kind of things that happen with data breaches and the litigation that was involved, because it's not just about trying to recover your systems. You know, if your computers are hacked and your network's taken down and you can't trade because your accounts package doesn't work, for example, or you cannot take people's cards, you know, debit and credit cards because your payment gateway is breached. It's more than that. It's about the fact that you may have breached a customer and now they're going to sue you. Same with these other things here, the Tessian blog, which lists some of the biggest GDPR fines. It is a problem. And as I said, the authorities seem to be responding to this by increasing the fines, and they're going up quite a significant amount. So it's a big problem. And just to make absolutely certain to hammer that message home, to really be a Debbie Downer on this thing, there's some more figures from Comparatech, from CNET, and also the Compare Camp, which is a comparison website that produces aggregated statistics about things like theft. So it could be all sorts of things: employee theft, it could be a data breach, it could be a virus, it could be a Trojan. Great. And even more information. 18,378 vulnerabilities reported. This is called NIST, which is an organization that tracks these things. And when we talk about vulnerabilities, we're talking about software that's done absolutely nothing wrong, but has got in it some way of being compromised. You may occasionally hear about these news stories where someone says, oh, well, I was using a very popular web browser and there was a vulnerability and it allowed someone to download a virus in what's known as a drive-by download virus attack. Microsoft, if you're using Microsoft Windows, doing their best to keep up with this. Same with some of the other browsers on maybe Linux, certainly Apple as well on Safari. But the reality is that with these kind of situations, it's an arms race. Just when the virus vendor, antivirus vendors and the security companies catch up with a vulnerability, the bad actors, which could be state-sponsored bad actors, because unfortunately there are some countries in the world where they are encouraging people to, or turning a blind eye, shall we say, to these activities. Those bad actors are helping to make this happen. And so just as you think you've got all the vulnerabilities, along come these bad actors and a new zero-day attack, as it's called, is released. It's a problem, and it's an increasing problem. And it, when I first started back in IT in the 80s, we never ever thought about this kind of situation. The most we worried about when we got to the 90s was the year 2000 problem. And believe me, there were many billions spent trying to mitigate the year 2000 problem. Now, late 90s, the rise of viruses and Trojan horses became a problem, and into the year 2000 became more of a problem. And then Microsoft and people like that woke up to it, and now you've got lots of antivirus vendors. But again, they're doing their best. Lots of antivirus vendors have these heuristic methods for detecting things, but they can't detect or prevent everything. So there's some numbers there. And you might say, well, that's great. I'm not producing or using a browser. I'm fairly confident my web browser is safe. This is a webinar for UltraEdit, and effectively that is just a text editor. So that's going to be okay, right? I mean, it just edits text. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as that either. Here's some figures from the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center from 2022, and that lists the number of complaints and losses over the last 5 years. And you can see in 2018, it was not quite as significant a problem, but we were still looking at $2.7 billion US dollars in losses. That's from complaints and threats and vulnerabilities. Now in 2022, which was obviously a couple of years back, but these are the latest figures we have, we're looking at nearly 1 million total complaints, almost 1 million, just under 1 million of complaints, and 10.3 billion US dollars in losses. It's a significant problem. And if, like I say, we're going to give you the slides later for this presentation, but you will be able to see those figures, those URLs, those links. Go to them, have a look yourself, and don't just take my word for it. I don't want you to think that I'm just spreading some kind of fear message to achieve an objective. No, we're trying to tell you here why it's something you should be aware of, but more importantly, what can you do about it? Well, what kinds of threats can you have with a text editor? Because it just opens text, right? And the kind of problems that you can have are abuse of third-party plugins. So, for example, if you are using a text editor that allows plugins, you can have security risks in those plugins, particularly if it's a unmoderated set of plugins. So there's an open marketplace for these plugins, and it's all available. And you would say, well, hang on, I can go and look at the text can look at the source code of these plugins and see if it's a risk. Well, that's fine, except I get messages saying that somebody can't hear audio, but I'm not receiving anybody else saying there's a problem. And I'm going to mute that so that they stop sending me alerts. You can say, well, you know, I can go and look at the source code of the plugins, and I can check and make sure that it's not doing anything dodgy. Well, that's fine if you've got the skills to go and examine these plugins. But seriously, are you going to go and examine the source code of every single plugin that you're using, go through there and detect the potential risks that are in those plugins and try and spot them? And that's even if you can spot them. I mean, if that plugin has, say, 6,000 lines of code, I've been a developer for 38 years, and I would still say that's actually quite difficult. You know, you can try, but doing it manually is going to be quite difficult. Evaluation injection, or eval injection as the abbreviation says there, and that means if you've got, say, an evaluation function like a what's known as a grep search or a regex search, where you're using wildcards, or maybe you're expanding tokens in your searches, or even you know, some directives in a macro or something like that, it can lead to those directives potentially evaluating code into something that's malicious. Likewise, it could be things like buffer overruns and stuff like that. And you've probably heard over the years the idea of a buffer overrun, where someone says, please insert your name into a website, and you type in 75,000 characters, and it causes the program to crash and then drop to some kind of prompt, or you know, completely break the website, because it doesn't have to actually have an objective other than to just cause a problem, i.e. make your software, your editor, unusable. You know, it doesn't have to have a financial objective. Some people just want to burn the world down to see the world in flames. Broken authentication. This is a big problem when authentication credentials, so usernames, passwords, SSH keys and things like that, are stolen, or they are exposed in a way that they shouldn't be, so that malicious actors can then hijack them. This happens quite often. People like GitHub, which are big source code repository, which is owned by Microsoft now, they actually scan for these kinds of problems and look for SSH keys. But if your vendor, if your text editor vendor is not using that, then they need to have their own ways of doing it. SQL injection. Well, if you're going to execute some code in your Notepad text editor, your actual text editor has got the capability of evaluating SQL, then you know, you can allow your attackers to do things like drop tables. They used to call it a script kiddie attack, where they would do things like, hey, look at this, I'm gonna delete all this data. And that's exactly what they do. They would use SQL injection to just cause havoc, you know, at schools and colleges and things like that. Well, SQL injection, you would think that as it's been around for so long that by now someone would actually have got rid of it, but unfortunately, no, it's still a big problem. Remote takeover vulnerabilities. That's where you have an editor that allows you to do things like peer share your screen, so that you're sharing your screen with someone else and edit the same file at the same time. Or maybe your editor is downloading some updates or a patch or a plugin, and your bad actor, your bad hacker, or whatever you want to call them, intercepts that mechanism, takes it over, and then downloads some code onto your machine, and then they install remote access software. This is exactly what happened to my father-in-law not more than a month ago, and he had antivirus on there and anti-malware software on there, but unfortunately, because he's suffering from some memory issues as he gets older, he just trusted what he was being told. Install remote access software, and they took over his computer. Luckily, he has a son-in-law who can actually help him out with these kind of things, and went over and fixed that. But that is a real kind of problem that's happening, you know, regularly. And the final one, which is kind of sad because as a developer, I feel a little bit bad about mentioning it, but developer negligence. Well, software developers, computer programmers, whatever you want to call them. For many years, my passport used to say computer programmer, but nowadays, I suppose we would call them a software developer. They are human beings. They're not the kind of fanciful figures that we've seen on Mr. Robot and The Matrix and stuff like that. They are human beings, and they're not infallible, and they do make mistakes. If you ever watched Office Space, a really good movie that's based in a software company, they make a mistake where they actually put in a piece of malicious software to take a couple of pennies from every transaction that happened in the bank. And he made a rounding error, and instead of taking pennies, he actually took hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they knew they were going to be in trouble because it get detected. That kind of negligence is very common. People make mistakes. If people didn't make mistakes, the software would have no bugs, right? You wouldn't need any bug reporting software because there would be no bugs. Unfortunately, yes, we are fallible. We do make mistakes. Well, that's great, but let's say now, what should we do to stop it? How can we do to stop it? I've mentioned all the ways for it to happen. How do we prevent it? Well, first and foremost, in the company, it's about training, understanding it, that a threat is real, explaining it in a way that is not hysterical or what's the word I'm looking for? Exaggerated, but actually matter of fact saying this is as real a threat as leaving your front door unlocked, as going and parking your car, at a gas station or somewhere like that, and leaving the keys in the ignition and the engine running. It's as real as walking down a deserted street in an unfamiliar place in the dark. You can do that 1,000 times and be perfectly safe. But then there's that one time where someone's waiting in the shadows and jumps you and takes you your wallet and attacks you or whatever. So treat it as a real threat. It's not about paranoia, but it is a real threat. And it's an existential threat to your business, because if you are unlucky enough to fall foul of this, the fines will not necessarily take into account that you were a nice person, or you're very, very sorry, or you did what you could, or you'd never realize it was a problem. The fines, do have a scale based on culpability, but at the end of the day, I don't know about you, but if you had $100,000 fine, for many people that could be the end of their business, being able to do that. And that's not just a financial thing, it's a reputational loss as well. Because if you lose the reputation and people say you're compromised, and this happened with Zoom actually, when Zoom was very popular during the COVID era, there was a way that was discovered that Zoom was vulnerable, and actually they probably then lost out to some of the other ways of video conferencing, and Teams, Microsoft Teams, are able to demonstrate they were more secure, and a lot more people adopted that way. So training, understanding it's a real threat, and not being hysterical about it. Good software development and procurement practices. So if you do develop your own software and you are this webinar to learn about things you can do when you work on projects, then adhering to good software development practices is quite important. And we're going to talk about some of those in a moment, because UltraEdit as a company do adopt those good software development practices. Software procurement practices, that means where you get your software from, where you got your components from, the editor and the add-ons and all the things that you use whilst you're developing the software, and doing things that are basic, laying the groundwork tests like unit tests, code reviews. Get someone to take a look over your code. If you write a memo to someone in Microsoft Word or something like that, you know how many times if you just send that memo out without someone having a look at it, 9 times out of 10 you go, oh no, there's a glaring error and I should have spotted it. And it happens all the time in my slides. Well, if it's just a memo, then it's not a problem. But if you're actually talking about source code, then just getting someone to have a quick, brief look through it as a code review, then not critique as such, but a review of the code, is actually just the same as getting someone to just say, I've got this really important memo where I'm going to give everybody a pay rise or not. And I just want you to take a look at it and make sure I haven't said anything stupid in my memo. Well, it's exactly the same with the code. The code review says, let's have a look at this and make sure I haven't said anything stupid in my source code, because it's just like writing a document. The same with peer programming or pair programming. And this is where you will work with someone. They will write one section of code, you will write another section of code, and then you'll swap over and review what you've done, and also make sure that the other person is doing what the specification or the request for work or the ticket, the support ticket had requested. Simple things. As a business, you should insist on all executables, all things that you are going to install on your computer, whether it's a Mac or Windows or Linux, that your executables are code signed. And if you don't know what code signing is, then I suggest you Google code signing. Code signing basically says that this, we'll use Windows as an example. This executable, this program that you're going to install is issued, it's created by someone who is a known person. So in the case of UltraEdit, it would be the UltraEdit company. And it then adds a cryptographic signature, which if someone edits the executable or changes it anyway, for example, a virus, or to insert some code that shouldn't be there, the cryptographic code signature will break. It is a very easy step to take. And this is one of the reasons why when you go to install applications on Microsoft Windows, you'll get that little window that pop up that says this is an unknown publisher. If you're installing something from maybe an open source project that doesn't sign its code, or a known publisher, if you're installing something from UltraEdit, for example, it will tell you who that person is, and it'll tell you whether the code certificate, as it's known, is secure. The rules for code signing were strengthened last year, and now it's extremely difficult for virus writers and Trojan horse writers to sign executables. I'm a developer. I write code every day and I sign all of my executables, and I actually have a physical hardware key that plugs into the back of my build computer that has to be present, and will then ask me additionally for another password in person when I go to code sign for the first time. Any executables that come from me are definitely from me. They've not been virus, they've not been into another third party's hands who then bolted on some extra spyware or virusware or just bad code that's going to accidentally reformat your hard drive or something like that. No, if it does that, it's my fault, because my signature, my code signature is on that. And the same, if you're going to download anything, download it from a, and I can't believe I even have to say this now, but download it from a site that's got that little padlock, SSL, HTTPS. You would be surprised how many software vendors out there are still shipping downloads where they are downloaded via HTTP, i.e. without the padlock. Microsoft Windows 11 and 10 make it very difficult to do that. And if you're using a modern browser like the latest versions of Firefox, Google Chrome, or Microsoft Edge, sorry, I was going to say Internet Explorer, but that's dead now, but Microsoft Edge, when you go to download something from HTTPS, it'll actually say to you, don't do this. This is not a safe place to download from. And you have to click on the thing that says, I don't care, I know this is a bad idea, do it anyway, and you click on the keep button and keep anyway. They deliberately make it annoying and awkward to do, and that's to protect you, because if you download from anything that hasn't got that padlock there, you are almost guaranteed that that could be vulnerable to a thing called a man-in-the-middle attack, and someone out there can inject some traffic into your web browser and redirect you to any place they want to, and there's nothing you can do about it. You might not necessarily know it's going to happen. With SSL, the certificate exchange goes on, and it's very, very difficult for them to intercept. Not impossible, because they can compromise your router and things like that, but it is extremely difficult to do. And the last thing, which is this simple thing that you should have on your network anyway, in general, or on your own computer, depending on what it is you're doing, and that is systematic multi-vector antivirus and anti-malware. Now, what do I mean by multi-vector antivirus and anti-malware? What I mean is don't just rely on one piece of antivirus software. Don't just rely on one piece of anti-malware software. I use Malwarebytes. I have no association with them whatsoever, but I've used it for years. It's extremely good. But I also use Microsoft Defender, and on my servers, I also use an additional cloud-based solution as well. That way, there are more chances of at least one of those things finding something horrible and warning me. So multiple ways of looking up, making sure that that problem is tracked in advance. Other things that you can do to stop it, and this is more on a kind of business level rather than specific to software developers, for example, and that is supply chain security. What does that mean? Well, if you are going to use something like UltraEdit, you need to know that UltraEdit's software is secure, but also you need to know that the people that supply your supplier, which is UltraEdit, that their software, their code is secure as well and has been tested and is not vulnerable to zero-day attacks and buffer overruns and all the other horrible things that go on. And not only that, if they have a supplier, you need to know that their supplier's supplier is also vulnerable. I know it sounds crazy, but supply chain security is literally that, the chain of people involved, the hands that touch the software you are going to use. You need to know every single one. It's like if you go to eat an apple, people sometimes don't wash fruit. And the thing is, that's all very well, because you might say, well, I trust the supermarket, the grocery store to have washed the apple. Okay, well, yeah, I would say bad idea. But not only have you got to trust the grocery store that you're at took good care of that apple and didn't drop it in something noxious or horrible, didn't have a cat pee on it or something nasty like that, but you also have to trust that the truck driver that delivered it didn't accidentally cough and sneeze all over the place and therefore infect your fruit. And the same with the people that actually packed it in the warehouse and the people that actually picked it from the field or the tree in the first place, and the people that took those picked apples and put them into carts that then went into the truck, which then went into the grocery store. It's the same with software. You are trusting that all those people that picked your apple, if you eat your apple without washing it, that all those people that touched your apple were not in some way sick, ill, or even crazy and wanted to do something horrible to your fruit. And I don't want to make you paranoid about fruit. Eat fruit, it's good for you. But you get what I'm saying. And it's the same with software. You need to know the software you're using, and every single bit of it that goes into the software has been looked after and cared for all throughout the chain of how it came into life, because it comes out of a software developer's head and gets into your computer. And the way that it gets there, it has to be something that you can understand. It's okay if the guy is sitting in your office and typing in the program, but 9 times out of 10, if you're downloading something like UltraEdit or some other text editor, he's not sitting there. The developer that writes UltraEdit for you is not sitting in your office, and therefore you can't watch over him. So supply chain is important. SCA and SAST, we'll talk about in a moment, but this is software and code analysis and static code analysis and supply chain analysis. You need to know, what does the app do and how does it do it? Is it doing something that you either don't like because there's some nefarious code in there that isn't really horrible, but it is doing something you disagree with? For example, it's sending all your statistics back to the Martian government or something like that. And with SAST and SCA, you can prove that the software is actually, it's compliant and it's taking the best steps, making the best chance of you not open yourself up to breach. Personal accountability. Do you know who is in charge of that company? Who is the public face of the company? Now with UltraEdit, we've got people on here today. Ben, for example, is back in the background there, and a few others as well. And you can put a name to the face of UltraEdit. It's not created by a group of people who are a loose collection of, or collective or something like that. There is a company. It is UltraEdit, and UltraEdit is owned by Idera, and I work for Idera. But there is personal accountability for what goes on with UltraEdit. You can literally get hold of someone whose job it is to be responsible for that. Corporate accountability, exactly the same. Transactional and contractual accountability. In other words, if you purchase UltraEdit, there is a purchase that's gone on. It is not something you got for free. It's not something you've been handed to a copy by a friend. You've actually completed a transaction, and implied in that transaction is some level of security and lack of vulnerability. And the same is with the contractual accountability. What I mean there is that you are buying it on the basis that it does what it says it will do. We have a list of things that we say on the UltraEdit site that we say that the product can do. And if it doesn't do it, there's accountability for that. You can come back to us and say, you told us it would open a 50 megabyte SQL file, SQL file in a couple of seconds, and it takes me half a day to do. Contractual accountability, transactional accountability. And finally, really on this list of things, of how do we stop it, is what I call mutually assured destruction, which sounds a bit like nuclear war, but in some ways there is some similarity there. And that is that if you do experience a breach because of a particular piece of software, and you can point the finger at that piece of software and it's definitely them, the pain that you experience is actually going to be the pain that the person who supplied that software is going to experience. In other words, if UltraEdit is in some way vulnerable, you can bet your life that people at UltraEdit are going to be extremely interested in knowing about that and panicking. If you've got a loose body of people that you've got the software from and it's an open source project, who is going to suffer from that? Who is going to be the person that is going to say, I take responsibility, it's my company name on this, it's my reputation that's based on this, it's my business model that's based on this. With open source, and I am a big fan of open source, but with open source alternatives, you do not have that mutually assured destruction thing. Yes, it could mean that the open source project is no longer trusted and fails, but the reality is that many people are going to suffer. But it won't necessarily be the people that are working on that project. In terms of mutually assured destruction, in a corporate sense, for UltraEdit, if there was a massive vulnerability that was found that was found to be a problem, you know, UltraEdit could be out of business. And believe me, that's going to be a problem. People are not going to want that to happen. And, you know, there will be heads rolling, there will be people fired, there will be meetings about meetings about meetings. So mutually assured destruction, if you have a big problem and the product is compromised, somebody somewhere is going to have a very bad day, and you'll be able to know who that is, and you better go to them. So how do UltraEdit stop this kind of issue? Well, there's several things. Secure coding practice and reviews. They don't check the code in unless it's been reviewed by 2 senior developers, and that's the pair and peer review that I talked about. They do static application security testing using Key1, which is a really weird name for a product, but it's a great product which does SAST, so static analysis of the software, and does testing on it, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I've got a little page all about it. Software composition analysis. So again, this is the supply chain problem that I talked about. So we know what goes into UltraEdit, and we validate it with third-party, an independent third-party piece of software goes and checks for vulnerabilities, and another piece of software goes and checks to work out what those vulnerabilities are, whether they've ever been mediated or remediated, and also that the supply chain is inviolable or intact, and that's what those two things do. They also don't process data, and most of the data is processed, it remains local. There are things that you will send up to the server, but that is something that you actively choose to do. It's not done in the background. They don't collect user or file or any sort of analytics data whatsoever, and that's actually a problem, because it'd be nice to know certain features we use, or how many copies there were and things like that. Beyond the license, that's what people know. You've got the license, and that license is good, but apart from that, we're not sitting there spying on you and watching what you're doing. The online license activation is also, as I mentioned before, using SSL or HTTPS. There are no insecure connections, and if you choose not to, let's say, for example, you're an embassy, one of the customers that I deal with is the Brazilian embassy, and you want to activate your license, but you have a rule that says you cannot have anything leaving the corporate network, the private network, to go and talk to outside servers, because it is a security risk, and actually in their case could be a national security risk. They have firewalls and things like that to compartmentalize things, but quite rightly they're paranoid, and they don't want that kind of traffic going out unregulated or unseen by their people and unmanaged. And so in that incident, in that kind of set of circumstances, there's an offline activation. Okay, so you can activate your license offline if that's what you choose. It's a bit more annoying. You've got to make a phone call, etc., but at least you don't have the UltraEdit editor going off and trying to talk to some server if that makes you uncomfortable. If we haven't convinced you that what we're trying to do is secure and corporately secure. And finally, on this particular slide, a software bill of materials. Now, what do we mean by the software bill of materials? Well, the software bill of materials is actually a federal requirement for procurement. So if you are dealing with the United States government and similar organizations, and probably European governments and things like that, they want to have a thing called a software bill of materials. And what that is that lists all the bits, quote unquote, that's my technical term for it, all the bits that go into UltraEdit. What are the libraries? What are the versions of those libraries? Where did you get them from? Who provided those? It's just like a bill of materials or a list of ingredients that you get on food. So if you get a cake and it's a great fruit cake, but you're actually allergic to pine nuts, for example, the ingredients list has to list certain things that are in the cake. They can get away with a couple of spices that are known to be not allergens, but generally speaking, most of the key ingredients are listed out. So the software bill of materials is very similar to that ingredients list. It doesn't tell you what proportions there are, but it does tell you all the bits that go into it, and it's quite important for certain federal requirements. But you know what? Even for you, wouldn't it be good to know that all the bits you've got are traceable, trackable, and you can understand what it's all about? A couple of other things you can do. You can turn the automatic updates off. They are sent to you by a way of saying, hey, there's an update available, rather than here's your update, I've installed it, now restart your editor. And I don't want to call out particular products, but Visual Studio Code, for example, has got a really good way of actually putting an update down, and it uses Electron in the background, or it did do. I think they might have changed that now, but certainly Node pushes the update down, and the next time you start the editor, it says, good news, I've updated for you. Wait a minute. We just validated all the things in your editor, and now you just automatically updated it. Oh, you can turn it off. Well, it's a bit late now. I've just updated it. UltraEdit doesn't do that. UltraEdit will tell you there's an update available, and then at your discretion, you can go ahead and choose that. And as it says here, they're completely disabled in the enterprise packages. because we know that if you've got an enterprise, you want to know what you've got out there and that your workforce are using. You validate it. You may go through a complicated validation process, and what you don't want to do then is end up with someone moving the goalposts on you, because suddenly we pushed a new update down and it's outside of your control. You've got, you know, images, machine images or something like that with the UltraEdit built into that machine image, that when a new employee starts, you give them a laptop, an image to the laptop or PC or whatever it is, and you want to know what the version of UltraEdit is that everybody's using, for example. Same with all the other things, optional cloud and server connectivity, we don't force that on you. Compliance with local controls, we use best practices for those kind of things. And the products are written in proprietary low-level code. So, you know, it's kept away from malicious eyes, which makes it harder to understand what's going on and hack it as well. And as it says there, we don't use popular but vulnerable web stacks or JavaScript libraries. So pretty cool stuff. I won't go through the other bits and bobs. If you want to see this, if you go to the website and look up security, there's a whole page there, but we'll give you those links another time. What are we doing to secure your editor and your data? Well, three-prong methodology. First, every version of our UltraEdit goes through the same stringent process. We talked about these standardized self-reviews, where the developer actually goes through and makes sure they're adhering to the stated best practices of the company, and peer review by more senior developers. So if we've got a more junior developer, that is reviewed by someone who's more senior, more experienced. You know, you don't just get to check some code in, particularly if you're reasonably new to the job. And by the way, reasonably new could be, I've been a developer for 5 years. Yeah, that's, you know, in this industry, that sounds like a long time, but actually, you know, in general, that's not the case. But senior developers are reviewing the junior developers code, and they are also, even the senior developers get peer reviewed as well. They don't get away with it just because they're senior. The source code is then thoroughly checked using static application software testing. That's what SAST stands for, and I'll tell you how we do that in a moment. And also uses SCA, so static code analysis, and also SCA is sometimes used to mean the same thing as software composition analysis. So we validate what's going in, and we validate the actual code to make sure that there are no known vulnerabilities. And we use tools, third-party tools, to do that. The code is manually reviewed and supported. Okay. UltraEdit is commercially supported editor. It's not a loose team of people who do it on a voluntary basis or just because they like it, or, you know, they're fans of the product. No, these are people that are actually paid to be there. Their job is to actually give you technical support. When you ask for technical support, it's an expert who works for the company who's replying to you. The software components native to the editor have gone through the planning, screening and testing before you even get to you. Do we find problems? Yes, that's what the tools are there for. Do we fix those problems? Yes. If we don't fix those problems, that part doesn't make it through. It's a no compromise solution that we're looking at. And in the event, if you need some help, the support team stands there and they're ready to assist. It could be anything. Could be, I don't know how to make the little you know, thumbnail views work or something like that, or how do I get the Explorer window on UltraEdit to appear? How do I double click and make this happen? You know, those kind of things. But it could be something more complicated. I want to know, does it do this? Does it have this component in it because I saw this on the news? I mean, that's not a really good support question, but that is the kind of thing that you could ask. What is it that we're doing in terms of software? Well, we're using some cutting edge tools. UltraEdit is managed and developed by a dedicated team of experts, and the reason I'm here today is because we want to show how seriously security is taken. This is the difference between commercial software that has a whole ethos that is security first and is customer focused, and, as I said earlier, mutually assured destruction. Our reputation rests on the product being sacrosanct and having a quality that it can't be allowed to slip. If you have a problem, we have a problem. If enough people have a problem, or it's a big enough problem that it makes news, for example, then we have a problem as a company. Also, we boost those defenses, the best working practices and all the other things, because human beings can't spot everything, and definitely you won't spot everything on large code bases like UltraEdits. We use some specialist tools. The two tools that we're talking about here, and we do use some others, but the two that we particularly use are Q1. I'm going to keep saying that name differently every time until I get it right, but it's Q1, SAST, and Black Duck, SCA, by Synopsys. Two different products. I wish Q1 would change their name to Cool Stuff or something like that, but that's how they pronounce it, Q1. And these are two products that are they are actually partially owned by IDEA. I think at least one of them is, and so is UltraEdit, but they are independent. The people at Q1 and people at Black Duck do not work for UltraEdit. It's a product that is, in Q1's case, a code security tool that does SAST, SCA, and QA. So quality assurance, making sure that things don't go wrong, and also automated software testing. And if you go to the website, you can even request a trial and try it yourself and see what it does. Also, if you want to understand how that impacts UltraEdit, go to the Q1 site and look at what it can do. This is a webinar that talks about security in general, and it may be that you're interested in your own products in terms of what you can apply, what kind of security patches you can apply to your own products. Go there and have a look and see what they do, because this will spot all sorts of vulnerabilities, and you can just about see in that screenshot there, it finds all the defects. This is not UltraEdit, by the way, but it will find an umpteen number of defects, and they rate those from serious or critical to concerning, shall we say, things that you should fix but are not significantly impacting the security of the product. It is trusted and well used. The same with the Synopsys Black Duck, which does a similar kind of thing. It knows exactly how your code works. It does static analysis where it goes through the actual source code of the product and tries to find everything that it can based on known vulnerabilities and also potential vulnerabilities. It uses heuristics and stuff like that. Again, if you're interested in security and you write your own software, perhaps, you might want to go to that website and have a look at yourself. Look for Synopsys Black Duck and give it a whiz. I have no connection with either of these companies, by the way, even though they're IDEA owned. I don't work for either of them, but this is what UltraEdit use because we believe in what they do, and it's to allow UltraEdit to be able to say, here's the steps we take as a company. Here's what we do as a company to make sure that the software is as safe as it can be. No software is going to be 100% safe for the rest of eternity. It's not going to happen because, as I said, this is an arms race. And as soon as every vulnerability is fixed, the people out there, and some of them, like I say, government sponsored, are going to be trying to find new ways to subvert your software, compromise your system. And because of the inequalities in the world in terms of finances, you might think that $1,000 vulnerability where someone can make $1,000 out of something is unpleasant, but not earth-shatteringly bad for you. But in some economies, $1,000 could represent a significant proportion of a monthly wage, maybe even several months' wage. And so, you know, there is a definite purpose for that, and that's ignoring the other reasons why people compromise these things for things like data integrity and misuse by unpleasant governments and things like that to try and get these things. But you know, these are the things that you're looking for with these SCA and SAST tools. Dependency analysis, making sure that what you've included in the software is safe, and binary analysis. It looks at the actual product and goes, after this has been compiled, never mind the source code, but after it's been created, did something happen during that process that made it vulnerable? likewise, this doesn't really apply to UltraEdit, but if you're producing, say, Internet of Things computer devices, let's say a building thermostat or a checkout, a point of sale system, or even a central heating controller, or a fan controller or something like that, or even a car engine controller, this tool can go and check all of that. Code print analysis and snippet analysis, these are things that you can find out directly by going to those websites. Again, not really trying to sell them, just saying this is what UltraEdit uses. So we're at the end of the presentation, and we've got a couple of questions. Really what I wanted to emphasize is not so much and say, hey, here's all the things that we do in terms of how UltraEdit are the best in the world. All I'm saying is that UltraEdit, this is what is done to ensure the quality, integrity, and reliability and security of UltraEdit. It's a great editor. I use it myself. I use it all the time for SQL files because I do a lot of SQL work. As I said, I'm a developer, and so I'm connecting to very big databases and opening, files that sometimes approach many hundreds of megabytes. Open it with UltraEdit and it's like magic. Try to open the same file with any other text editor, and UltraEdit just spanks it. It just absolutely shoots ahead. And it's good to know that not only is it super fast, but it's also got the software integrity there behind it. One of the questions we've been asked is, how does UltraEdit, actually, let me reword what I said because the question is a bit confusing. Can UltraEdit be integrated with RAD Studio Delphi? Well, the reason that is being asked is because I quite often work as the RAD Studio developer advocate. So I work for Embarcadero most of the time, and one of their products is RAD Studio. The answer is there is no direct integration at the moment. But we're looking at ways of expanding what can be done with RAD Studio, and if you think that UltraEdit would be something that would be useful, drop me a line, or in fact drop the UltraEdit guys and girls a line and just say what it is you would like to see, and if it's a good idea, then it's a good idea. And some of these ideas that we get from these webinars are quite they're so obviously good that we try and do what we can within the realms of possibility to make them happen. So if you think there's something that we could do in terms of integration with RAD Studio and UltraEdit, then drop us a line and let us know. I think that's basically at the top of the hour. I hope you found it useful. Or a little bit unnerving, depending on what you think of it. We are going to post a replay on the YouTube channel, and I'm sure there'll also be a blog post as well, Tristan and Ben. And if I've done nothing else, what I've tried to do is to encourage you to think about security and realize that security is something we all have to take part in, all of us. And the security doesn't just mean, simple things like virus scanning files that you've downloaded on the internet. It's a lot more than that. Particularly supply chain security is quite significant risk, but also showing you some of the possibilities for mitigating some of those problems, and also, perhaps more importantly, that illustrate that UltraEdit takes those steps that are probably beyond something that a collective of people working on open source might have, or maybe a freeware project or something like that, not necessarily open source, but closed source, which could be even worse because, the product's given away for free and you don't have access to the source. I mean, open source at least gives you the opportunity to take a look at it, even if it's beyond your capabilities. But closed source and free, that's even worse. Not so good. But UltraEdit, taking the best steps that they can to make sure things are good and safe for you. Okay, well, thanks for joining us, and I may well see you again another time. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.